Small doses. The first relief package for the second COVID wave falls short of expectations. After asserting that people should wait for the union budget's announcement to trickle down before seeking a fresh stimulus to cope up with the second wave of the pandemic, the government finally unveiled a relief package of sorts this Monday. The financial implications of the measures, such as the promise of easy small ticket loans for 25 lakh micro entrepreneurs and 11,000 tourist agents and free tourist visas, have been projected at about 6.29 lakh crore rupees by the Finance Ministry. Nearly 2.68 lakh crore rupee of this is in the form of credit guarantees. A further 1.5 lakh rupee crores of guarantees has been promised to add to the 3 lakh crore rupee emergency credit scheme, but the scheme's tenure hasn't been extended beyond September 30. Similar backing has been announced for loans worth 60,000 crore rupee to COVID affected sectors, but only tourism has been publicly identified. Enhancing loan guarantees will perhaps give risk-averse lenders more confidence in extending loans when the credit deposit ratio has hit a multi-year low. But there is little to make such loans viable by stirring demand for goods and services. Free visas are a good idea but are unlikely to gain traction till India has a firmer grip on the pandemic by providing vaccines for all, including for those under 18. Loans of 1 lakh rupee to 10 lakh rupee for travel agents may help meet some liabilities or expenses but won't make people take holidays. Just like last year's 20 lakh crore rupees package, the actual outgo from the exchequer this time is minimal and the direct stimulus to demand abysmal. Additional spending of 15,000 crore to ramp up pediatric healthcare with guarantees for 50,000 crore rupee low interest loans for health projects in the hinterland are critical to cope with future pandemic waves. It makes sense to direct resources towards health and foster vaccination, but the inclusion of measures already announced, such as fertilizer subsidies and food grains for the poor, along with spends planned over the next 2 or 5 years, and even a 77.5 crore rupee bailout plan for an ailing farm marketing firm gives the package just extra padding. Investing time and resources to figure out some form of income support for the vulnerable sections in rural and urban areas would have been more helpful. Weak demand is a bigger concern for industry this year as high inflation, a propensity to save for future medical bills, and an uncertain job market have led to belt tightening from consumers. If the government is hesitant about creating new dolls for the fear of them becoming permanent futures, it could have at least offered some immediate relief for all by addressing the elephant in the room, high fuel prices. This would dampen inflation, empower RBI to lend greater support to growth, and leave a little more money in people's hands to spend. While the effort to maintain fiscal restraint may impress global rating agencies, they would be among the first to acknowledge that there is a tipping point where policy inaction risks hurting the economy's long-term prospects. Desert home. India seems to have warmed up to the UAE as a cricketing venue after earlier misgivings. The ICC 2020 World Cup's shift from India to the United Arab Emirates was inevitable following the recurrent waves of COVID-19 infections and the logistical difficulties of hosting an event featuring multiple squads. Over the last few weeks, the news first started as a source-based whisper before the Board of Control for Cricket in India top brass president Sourav Ganguly and secretary Jay Shah spoke individually, clearly stating that India would host the championship in the UAE. Finally, the International Cricket Council issued a statement declaring that the tournament will be held from October 17 to November 14, with Oman stepping in as a co-host for the qualifiers. Once the BCCA scheduled the remainder of the Indian Premier League in West Asia ahead of the T20 World Cup, it was no surprise that the Premier Championship too would follow suit. With its three grounds at Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Sharjah being in close proximity, the UAE cuts out the need for air travel and teams can adhere to bio-bubbles in their respective hotels, an essential requirement in these fraught times of a constantly mutating virus. India hosted England earlier this year and the IPL 2 commenced the season, but the pandemic surge meant that the league had to be suspended while a second win was sought in the desert sands prior to the T20 World Cup. That for a year India paused its domestic cricket makes it all the more difficult for it to suddenly lend its way to international fixtures at home. Now that the ambivalence has been said, it is interesting to note the emergence of the UAE as a popular neutral venue. Fans of a certain vintage would recall post-Jost at Sharjah lit up by the legendary exploits of stars ranging from Javed Mayandad to Sachin Tendulkar. And then India stayed away for a while as talk about bookies and off-field corrupt influences surfaced. Meanwhile, terrorism-scarred Pakistan kept the UAE as its home venue as nervous rivals refused to land either at Karachi or Lahore. Since then, India has warmed up to the UAE as a cricketing outpost while Pakistan has found a few visitors willing to play off its turf. As the second host for the IPL, the UAE has always stepped forward and India had an instant solution for the T20 World Cup hosting crisis. After winning the inaugural ICC World T20 in South Africa back in 2007, India has suffered a title drought and there is a case for course correction. But before that, its dual units have to tackle six limited overs contests in Sri Lanka and five tests in England.